Are you a-mill, post-mill, pre-mill, dispensational pre-mill? What are you today on Life Talks? We're going to be talking about the millennium. No, not the Millennium Falcon. We're talking about the millennium, meaning the 1,000-year reign of Jesus. It's in the Bible, people, and it's a source of interpretation, contention, debate that's been going on for 1,000 years.
Shocking. Shocking.
I'm Ben. I'm the lead pastor here at Life Fellowship Church. I'm here with Josh, our producer at Life Talks. Mm-hmm. And Josh, we're in eschatology.
Yep.
We are, we talked about Jesus' return is going to be sudden. It's going to be visible. It's going to happen bodily. And there's all these signs that will precede it.
Yep.
What we're trying to do today is talk about, okay, we know that's going to happen. And then how and when that happens, that's up for debate. So we're going to look at the millennium because when it comes to the 1,000-year reign, a lot of people have some debate on when does that really happen?
Yeah.
And this kind of goes back to the conversation we had during our ecclesiology conversation. What role in relationship does the church have with Israel? So much of what you believe about that.
Yeah.
So much of what you believe about the Abrahamic covenant, the Davidic covenant, the new covenant that we see in Scripture, how those are fulfilled really comes down to what you believe about the millennium. Okay, so you can't just, I know some people are like, well, just read the Bible. Just read the Bible. And I'm like, we're all reading the Bible.
Every time I hear someone say that, it's like,
there's really, what I find interesting, and this is when I went to seminary and we talked about this, and I went to a dispensational premillennial school, which means I was theologically trained out of school that taught me that Jesus's return will happen in two phases. There will be a rapture of the church, where all the Christians on the planet will go up into heaven. There will be a 7-year period by which God, the Great Tribulation, the Antichrist, Israel is kind of restored in a way, and then Jesus returns at the end of 7 years.
Yeah.
And that's the beginning of a millennial reign of Jesus.
Right.
So that's how I was educated. That's how I grew up. That's how I assumed that's what everyone believed.
That's how all the Christian kids my age were educated by Left Behind.
Well,
this is what we all know.
Exactly. And so what I realized is, and when I went to seminary and they would teach you, like I had classes called premillennial dispensationalism, I'm like, okay, yeah, I get to really learn about these kinds of things. And then when you take the class and you're trying to learn about the other viewpoints, and I remember asking, well, what Bible verses do they use to back up their beliefs? Because I'm reading and I'm interpreting my things, and they're like, oh, they use the same verses. And I'm like,
wait,
oh, time out. So you're telling me, because you learn this as a Christian, like show them the Bible, show them the Bible verse, and you'll be able to explain everything.
Yeah.
And then you're like, so wait a second, they use the same.
It'll never return void.
Yeah, you're telling me that they're using the same Bible references as I am. Yes. They just view it completely differently.
Yep.
Oh, this is where you get into issues of hermeneutics. Okay. So, it's one of these things where you have to really know what you believe about the covenants. What do you believe about the church in Israel? These are all things that go into. So when you get to the book of Revelation, I thought, all of Revelation is this future kind of story, and if cryptic language, there's a lot of things going on with trumpets and bowls and woes and supernatural events like crazy. And I just read it as kind of like a book that you would like, this is a future book that's going to happen. And then you realize, oh no, some people interpret that in a very different way, that these are things that have already happened and that will happen in cycles over and over and over again.
Really?
Yeah, there's all different kinds
I
of
haven't heard that.
Yeah, so there's all different kinds of interpretations to the book of Revelation, the apocalypse of John.
Yeah.
And so, so even how you approach the book is going to influence how you interpret the book. Right. And so everyone, here's the thing you've got to understand. Everyone has presuppositions. Everyone has presuppositions. And what your presupposition is will tell you how you interpret these kinds of things. I share that. What I'm not saying is, well, it doesn't really matter what you believe. No, I do think it matters what you believe. I do think that, though, just you got to remember that there are good Christians that believe in every four of these major camps. So don't think that I think a lot of Christians, and I find this a lot with Christians that were my grandparents' age and my parents' age. Okay, so World War II generation and to baby boomers, they made eschatology almost like a man. If you don't align with me and my eschatology, I will doubt your salvation.
Right.
That to me was really extreme.
Yeah.
That's just not necessary.
Yeah.
I think my generation was the first generation to really start questioning, I'm not sure if I really believe all these kinds of things. And so, and I know we got into a little bit with Dan and in our ecclesiology series, but I came to an evolution of my own. I started dispensational. I probably land somewhere in between of classical, premillennial. I remember when we did our Daniel series about 16 months ago, when I was sharing, I did a huge graphic on the screen when I was preaching through Daniel, and I said, here's the 4 major viewpoints. I went through all of these. Yeah. So I actually thought about, do I just pull the clip from that sermon and just plug it in here? And because we've already taught on this before at this church. But there's what I would say is I put money down. If I was to put money down on things, like if I have $100, how much money am I putting on each of these things to be true? Right. So let me go through these 4, and I'll tell you where I put my money on, how I split up my money on these things. So Revelation chapter 20, you have this description of Jesus returning and him reigning for 1,000 years. So the first major interpretation of this passage is what people call the amillennial position. There's no literal 1,000 years. This 1,000 years was meant that Jesus, when it says that Jesus is reigning, what it means is when he rose from the grave and when he sat at the throne, at the right hand of the throne of the Father, as it says that in Acts chapter 2, that he is reigning. That this idea of at the end of chapter 19 starts another cycle of 20, 21, 22 in the book of Revelation to tell you what's already been happening. So this reign of Jesus has been happening. The 1,000 years is merely a symbolic number meant that Jesus is reigning fully. Right. That Satan is bound right now. So because we know in the 1,000-year reign that Satan is bound within this 1,000 years. And so Christ has conquered death. He's conquered Satan. We have that language even in the New Testament. So therefore, this reign that is happening, this church age is the millennium. Okay, that's why amillennial means no millennium, no literal 1,000 years. Yeah. And at some point we don't know if it could happen today, it could happen tomorrow, that at some point Jesus will return. The resurrection of both believers and non-believers will happen. The judgment of non-believers and believers will happen. And then they will all enter into the eternal state, new heaven, new earth, lake of fire. Amillennialists really have like you see the chart of like future events. It's really simple. I mean, it's like 2 left turns and you're done. Okay. Have you seen those eschatological charts, that people have? No. Okay. So if you look up dispensational, there's all kinds of crazy stuff happening. Yeah. Amillennials are really simple. Typically, this was a viewpoint that was really popular back in the Middle Ages. Okay. You have historic premillennialism that was popular from the time of the disciples till about the time of Augustine. From the time of Augustine till about the time of the Enlightenment, you have amillennialism being the predominant viewpoint of the church. Okay. The next viewpoint is you have postmillennialism. Postmillennialism is this idea that the church age that we have here, that Jesus instituted at Pentecost, that we will usher in the kingdom. We'll usher in the millennium, I should say. That the whole role of the church is to make the world more Christian. It doesn't mean that not everyone will be a Christian, but just like there were laws that Israel had with morality, that we as the church, as the new Israel, will establish godly, moral laws that will take over the world. And so we will prepare the world so that when Jesus returns, he's going to be like, oh, you've already done most of the work. Let me just finish it off for you.
So then these people are probably going to be more likely to be into like creating theocracies right now and things like that.
100%.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, this belief really took off in the Enlightenment. What was the driving force of the Enlightenment?
I don't know.
Mankind is becoming better, right? Like this belief that we are discovering things, and it almost drove the modern missions movement. When you look at all the missions that took place in the 18th century, 19th century, it was driven by this philosophical, theological view that we are going to Christianize the world, okay? And so the great mission societies of America and in England and Europe,
big universities here, would that be like an example of that? Yes,
we're going to educate. The Sunday school, the public school system. It was all about so that people could read the Bible, and we're going to make the world a better place. And because we want Jesus to return, Jesus cannot return until we have done our job.
Yeah.
So people don't realize, man, there is a motivation behind some of these things.
Yeah.
So postmillennialism was really popular, I would say, between, late 1600s, early 1700s, right till about World War I and II. World War I and II pretty much destroyed postmillennialism. You know why?
No.
Because you have these massive world wars where tens of millions of people were slaughtered and killed.
Jesus didn't return.
And it was what the point was no, we're not actually getting better. After all this time, after all these years, we have the potential that with technology to destroy the world.
We saw the Holocaust. Yeah.
No, man is not getting better.
Yeah. And
so what you see kind of coming into fruition, and really around the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s, you see this idea of dispensationalism. The idea that, no, there's going to be this rapture. You never see the idea of a rapture ever in any theologian, in any church father, nowhere. I mean, they have one kind of guy that mentions something around the 400s that mentions something like that could be interpreted like this.
Okay.
But I'm talking in the hundreds and thousands of theologians and pastors and sermons and do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's never this idea of a pre-trib rapture anywhere. And around the 1850, a guy by the name of John Darby comes up with this idea that that the coming of Jesus, just like Jesus established a two-phase implementation of his kingdom, that he inaugurated the kingdom at his first return, and he's going to be coming back again. Because most people thought in the Old Testament, there's going to be, when the Messiah comes, he's going to do it all. Well, there was two phases to the Messiahship. He believed there's two phases to the return. And so that's why he said there's this initial return where he just comes and raptures the church out, and then he's going to return later.
Yeah.
Again, we don't find that anywhere really in the scriptures. And when people say, well, no, look, read the first, Thessalonians where it says we're going to be taken up. Yeah, but what that's talking about is historic premillennialists will believe, no, that just means that Jesus is we're going to meet him in there and come immediately back down. There's not going to be this time period in between, because that Greek word that is used in that phrase is a time. It's used to go out and meet someone who's outside the city and walk back in with them. It's not meant to be like there's a space in between. So premillennial dispensationalism is the belief that we have the church age.
Yeah.
Okay. Jesus is going, the initial return of Jesus, he's going to rapture the church out.
Right.
And during that time period, Jesus will restore Israel back to himself. The 70th week of Daniel has to take place. And then he will return 7 years later.
Is there anything not weird that there's nowhere in Scripture that mentions the returns of Christ?
In two phases?
Well, just like it doesn't pluralize that. We're not talking about returns. It's like...
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the problem.
Right.
That's unfortunately, when people read about the return of Jesus, some people, they read into, Jesus is talking about the rapture. No, he's not talking about the rapture.
Yeah.
You have to think about, and one of the greatest arguments against a dispensational viewpoint is, if the phases happen if there's a two phase, and we know there's a literal 7 years, then guess what? We do know when he's going to return.
Once that countdown starts.
Right. That's one of the greatest arguments against premillennial dispensationalism, is that the moment that 7-year tribulation starts, we know when he's going to return then.
I feel like they're just going to say, like, yeah, but he's talking about before the 7 years. Like, all the time before the 7 years, no one knows.
But that's a false interpretation.
Yeah.
Right? Because when he's talking about his return, he's talking about the one singular return.
The capital R return.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, what you're doing is you're doing eisegesis. You're reading the meaning into the text when you're saying, oh, no, that's the first return, that's the second return. I'm like, no, that's not how people for the first 1,800 years of church history interpreted any of that. And to me, I would say, if it wasn't around in the first 1,800 years, and Jesus is like, oh, man, you guys have gotten this wrong the entire time, I just have a question about the legitimacy of it. Okay,
right. I mean, it's like it's possible for like Martin Luther,
sure,
like there were helpful things,
but that was a rediscovery of the original belief.
Fair, yeah,
okay,
yeah.
So what dispensationalists believe is that Jesus will return, and that Jesus will then reign for 1,000 years, literally 1,000 years, and then after the end of 1,000 years, then it will be the eternal state, the judgment, and then the eternal state. That's premillennial dispensationalism.
Okay.
Then finally, you have classical premillennialism. Again, this has been the prominent viewpoint of the early church. Again, first 300, 400 years of the church really believe in this. And this believes in, we have the church age, we have Jesus, that the tribulation will be towards the end of the church age, but the church will go through the tribulation. That when Jesus returns, we will go up and meet him and come back down with him. It's going to be one act. It's not going to be, we're going to be raptured up and then 7 years, and then we come back down. No, we're up and then we're back.
That feels weird.
That's...
I don't understand the why.
Yeah. Well, I mean, why does it say that he will meet us in the air? Right? Paul talks about that. So the whole idea is, when Jesus returns again in Genesis, in Revelation 19, he's got a sword. Okay, so when he's coming to do judgment. He's coming to, we know it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
He's not coming to, he's not coming to serve. He's not coming to die. He's not coming to sacrifice. He's coming to bring judgment on the world. I believe what he means is I'm pulling my people out so that when I come to the sword, they're not going to be an end. There's in no way going to be any kind of judgment coming upon them. So that's the whole reason of him drawing them out of the world before he returns. Does that make sense?
But they would come back right away.
Right away.
The idea.
Right.
But then wouldn't they then experience all the tribulation stuff?
No, because the tribulation's already happened.
Oh.
The tribulation is not necessarily a 7-year period. It is just a time period of intense persecution.
It's the thing that happens while they're up? This thing
No, it happens.
I'm sorry. I keep on still not getting this.
So the church, in classical premillennialism, we believe that the Great Tribulation will happen while we're here.
Okay.
We're living through it.
Gotcha.
Some people call them post-tribs. But Jesus, we will not meet Jesus in the air until we live through the tribulation,
which won't necessarily be 7 years.
It might not be necessarily 7 specific years, but it's going to be a time period of intense persecution.
Yeah,
we will meet him in the air, come back down, and Jesus will reign. Probably not necessarily 1,000 years, but it's a period of time to show like the reign of Jesus, and at the end of that will be the judgment, great white throne of judgment, and then the eternal state, new heaven, new earth, lake of fire. So those are the 4 main views. So
which one is yours?
I lean most days classical premillennialism,
which is what you just described.
As I just described. I just don't. I understand. I think the 2 biggest ones that have the most theological merit and interpretation is amillennialism and premillennialism, classical premillennialism. Because you really have to decide how you're interpreting certain things. Where I see the least amount of scriptural proof is dispensational premillennialism and postmillennialism. I see. So, for example, if I had $100, that I was going to put down and say, what's going to happen?
Yeah,
I probably put $70 down on historic premill. Okay, I'd probably put $15 down on Amil. $15 on Amil. I put $10 on dispensational.
15 out of 100. Sorry, I thought we got 1,000. Okay,
no.
Yeah, okay.
So 70,
15.
70, 15, 10 on dispensational.
Yeah.
Just because it's how I grew up.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just going to give it
Just
like,
gotta have a little bit.
and let's be honest, don't you not want to be around during the Great Tribulation? I mean, there's a part of you that's just like, Lord, that would be great if we weren't around, but it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
And then the last $5 I put in post-mill,
Yeah.
it's just like, just in case.
So I appreciate how you're so not like confident you are. Like, you know exactly what's going on. The stuff is really confusing.
Yeah.
To your best guess, are any of these numbers we've been talking about, 7 years, 1,000 years, do you think any of those would be taken literally? Or do you kind of feel like all of these numbers might be figurative?
Yeah, that's what most all-mill people, post-mill people, and even some pre-mill people would say. Yeah, these are not specifically, they're not meant to be interpreted as exact numbers. These numbers are symbolic of other. They're making it's making a theological point.
Yeah.
Right. But I do think there's enough things in the Old Testament that deal with specific numbers that are specific, and you're like, okay, I totally understand why you would believe that.
Right.
So I'm not willing to die on a hill whether they're to be taken literally or figuratively.
Yeah.
I see the arguments for both.
Yeah.
I probably lean more towards a figurative interpretation.
Yeah.
But again, if I'm not going to die on that hill. If you're like, you got to be a part of you got to lead a church that has a stand on literal interpretation of these numbers, I'd be like, all right.
This is such a non-essential.
Yeah. To me, this does not drive or influence a lot of what I do.
Yeah.
Again, going back to the previous episode, it's really about Jesus's imminent return. That to me is what matters most, because that does have implications of how I live my life. So anyways, that's the millennium.
All right.
Man, I hope this hasn't been confusing to anyone. I know we just were throwing out notes. This is why I love PowerPoints and charts, because when you're talking about all these numbers and times, it can get very confusing. And I think if you go back to the sermon I preached in August of 2022, you'll probably find a sermon I preached, I think it's in Daniel 2 is when I talked about these, and I had the charts on the wall or on the screen. Go check it out. I hope it'll be encouragement to you. But hey, we are almost done with eschatology. We got one more episode to go. Thank you again for joining us here on Life Talks. We'll talk to you next time.